How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is sideboarding. So while we might know where to hand trap, I do want to make it apparent that your sideboard is way more important, because sometimes hand trapping a deck isn't enough. Sometimes your deck just cannot deal with another deck, or you don't have a main deck out to deal with your strategy. So you really have to focus on your sideboard before an event and make sure that A, it's generic enough, and B, you're able to deal with the matchups that you otherwise just can't deal with in your main deck. So we're going to make sure that we go over about 9 or 10 different decks today. We're going to be talking about if you're playing that deck, what kind of sideboard options do you have available to you as far as blowouts go. Then also, if you're playing against the deck, what kind of blowouts do you have available to you to be able to beat that deck. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors, definitely go over to Imperium Duelist or Dragon Shield. Both are lovely companies, and I'm so happy to have them as my sponsors. Also, if you've not already joined the giveaway, if you go over to my Where to Hand Trap Dictionary Edition, definitely go ahead and comment down below for your chance to win the Sunavalon deck. We're going to be giving this away in just a couple more days, so definitely make sure that you go ahead and go check that out. Also, we're on our way to 15,000 subscribers. I know that we're roughly about 1,500 away, so definitely go ahead and smash that sub button, because I really want to do something special at 15,000. It's such an incredible goal, and I'm very excited to be able to get there soon. Without further ado, let's hop right into the video today, and the first thing that I want to cover is going to be a couple questions I want to have you ask yourself whenever you're going to go ahead and build a sideboard. The first question being, how many different variants of certain decks are there in the format, and are you particularly not wanting to play against certain variants of different decks? This can be the same as talking about like Despia this format and seeing like the adventurer build versus the Predaplant build versus doing even like the allure, like a lot of search build, because they're hand trapped very differently and they're also sided for very differently. Also talking about what are the blowout cards in the format, what cards should we be aware are here, and what cards do the most to everything in the format. What can your deck side? Because certain decks can't sideboard some of the blowout cards because they'll vice versa hurt the deck that you're trying to play as well. Also, are there side cards that hit this matchup and other matchups that you're worried about? So the biggest thing that I want you to take away from these questions, though, is what cards can overlap in the most matchups. And usually this is how you end up finding your best sideboard for an event, because you want to keep your sideboard generic enough, but we'll still play cards like Token Collector, because even if Swordsoul is one of the most prevalent decks and other cards will hit it, there's also just the ability to be able to play a card like Token Collector and instant win that matchup, quote unquote, because sometimes they just are able to play around it, right? But at the same time, we still play cards, even like the Cycle Reader, back when Drytron was a really big issue. And that's because sometimes your sideboard has to be a little less generic to deal with very specific matchups, but most of the time you should be aiming to make your sideboard as generic as possible. And so when we're talking about blowout cards in the format, this is what I'm talking about. Now, we don't have Token Collector or Dark Ruler on here, but they're definitely included. I just got together a list of cards here that are very generic and things that I think are very good this format, just so you can kind of get a snapshot of what I'm talking about when I say about blowout cards in the sideboard. So today's video is specifically focusing on blowout cards versus like twins and cosmics. I feel like those are kind of implied in that they're going to be in your sideboard regardless, because every single deck in the game has some kind of issue with some kind of back row. And so you want to make sure that you have at least twins in your side, right? Especially if you're playing against like Floowandereeze or what have you. You want to make sure that you have something that you're able to deal with those decks with. So again, just a general blowout cards. But so another question that I have for you is, a lot of people are still not familiar with what Blizzard is. And so I want to ask a question here. Is Blizzard better than Judgment? So I don't think that you can compare the two, but I think that there is a solid argument for both. I think that Judgment is a really cool side card that a lot of people try to run, but in my opinion, Judgment should only be sided whenever you're trying to protect a very specific combo. Let's say if you're trying to go for like the Scythe Lock, I think that things like Judgment or even a Strike are fine, because that's protecting something that once it resolves, you just win the game. But if you're more worried about like setting up a big board and then having your board get broken by something like Dark Ruler, I think that a card such as Blizzard is just objectively better, because you're not cutting your life in half as well. And I do think that if they go like Droplet, send a spell, then they're still wasting a lot of cards out of their hand. And this is more specifically going to be for decks that are putting in things like Dark Rulers, Lightning Storms, card that you're particularly afraid of. So I think that they both do very separate things, but I think that the Solemn Judgment is really good, again, just for like protecting a specific combo, whereas Blizzard is overall just a very good card, especially if you're versing against like Despia or something, and you can shut down like Branded Fusion for a turn, especially if your deck can OTK in the follow-up turn. I think that it's a really nice card and a really nice inclusion to the format. So definitely go ahead and pick up a playset of these. They are common, and I think there's also supers, but they're just something nice just to have, you know? So if you get anything from this video, I definitely recommend picking up a playset of Blizzard. Going into our first deck today, though, we have Despia. We're going to be doing slides of against the deck, and then if you're playing the deck, and talking about sideboarding and the blowouts that you can play or play against. So if you're playing against like the Allure build where they're searching a lot, I do recommend having Droll come in after game 1, just because this is something that can really hurt the deck a lot. Not being able to get the Tragedy Search, no more Allures, no Patchworks. It's all very strong. Also, against the deck, using cards like Deep Barrier, Artifact Scythe, and Sanctum. I think that this package in the sideboard is utilized more in decks like Striker, but I definitely still like it in other decks as well. If you have the opportunity to play this, I definitely recommend, just because, again, Scythe is still Scythe, right? It's still a very broken card that I highly recommend if you have the ability to play it. Again, against the deck, using cards like Blizzard, very strong for things like Branded in Red and Branded Fusion. Also, having cards like Anti-Spell, of course, against this deck is super strong. But what are we talking about if we're going and playing the deck? So it's going to be a little bit different. If you're playing the deck, you can utilize cards like Zombie World. If you're playing the deck, you can utilize cards like There Can Be Only One. You can use a lot of the same cards in this matchup for if you're going against or if you're playing the deck. And you're going to see how these cards are pretty similar in just about every matchup, but you'll see how it changes over time and how certain matchups just can't play some of the better cards. So if you are playing the deck, though, again, Sanctum Scythe, Blizzard, D-Barrier, Droll, all of these cards are still very, very good, and they're all good options for you if you're looking at playing Despia and you're wondering what could be in your sideboard. So I do hope that these slides alone are something that you can go back to and really be able to reference and be like, oh, I didn't know I could actually play that card. That card's really good. And it's really nice to see that too. And we'll talk about why some of these cards are just kind of dropped out against certain matchups and why I wouldn't prefer playing them. The next deck that I have for you is going to be Predaplant. I feel like these are very similar, but if you're playing against the Predaplant variant versus the Despia variant, you can Droll a lot better and you can Nibiru a lot better, because this deck does play into the rock very hard. Utilizing your backer outs, of course, Anti-Spell, but if you're playing the deck, it gets a little different. You can utilize cards like Zombie World, again, still very, very strong. I wouldn't recommend using Droll if you're playing the deck. Like, you can. I just feel like there's a lot of value still, especially if you have the Predaplant Fusion in the graveyard to go ahead and add you like the Super Poly in the end phase. So there are certain ways that Droll can hurt you on your opponent's turn, even if you shut them down. If they have any way to clear your board, you want to make sure that you get those graveyard effects because they're still really important, especially if you utilize like a Mirror Jade and you don't want to just go ahead and set a card, you want to add it to your hand. I still feel like it's worthwhile to just not run Droll. I think that there's still a lot of other hand traps that you're playing anyways, and I don't think that it's that bad of a trade-off here. So if you're against Swordsoul, utilizing cards like There Can Be Only One, Token Collector, even Regeki is really strong against this matchup. Dark Ruler, and then again, a lot of the same cards here, talking about the Artifact package, the Rock, D-Barrier, again, all very strong. If you're playing the deck, though, you can use cards like Mystic Mind, which is really strong, especially games 2 or 3 when they don't side in any backer out for you. You can utilize cards like Anti-Spell. I didn't put it on here, but you can utilize cards like Rivalry, really strong as well. Even Droll, just again, being able to kill on the follow-up turn after you Droll someone is really impactful. So that's something that I really enjoy about playing Swordsoul. Moving on to Eldlich. So I have these in 2 separate categories here. On top is if you're playing against like the back row variant of Eldlich, where it's just like set 5 pass. But the one that's actually just got like second place at a regional, won a regional, went I think undefeated in even another regional and got top cut. I'm talking about the Brave Eldlich Punk deck, and that's going to be the entire bottom row here, using cards like the Artifact package, Anti-Spell, Droll, Nibiru, Token Collector, all very impactful. That deck is really starting to see a rise in play. And again, it's the Brave Punk Eldlich deck. So definitely make sure that you're on top of that deck being around in the format and really starting to look up builds for it and learn how to play around it. Again, it's usually just about the same way that we play around like the Punk deck, but they're just adding in the back row from the Eldlich cards as well. If you're playing against this deck, though, this is how I would do it. Yet, if you're playing the deck itself, you can use cards like Lava Golem. You can still use cards like Zombie World. That doesn't really hurt you at all. Again, Anti-Spell, your artifact package. A lot of these, again, are going to be kind of similar, but you have other options too, again, like Lava Golem, where if you are forced for a turn to just utilize like your Brave package and the Eldlich cards, it's still not going to be the worst turn, and you also are able to clear a lot off the board with things like Spear Mode or Lava Golem. If you're playing against Floowandereeze, I didn't really want to add in Cosmic or Twisters in this just because I was talking about more blowout cards, but I do just want to say that utilizing Cosmic and Twister is especially important against the Floowandereeze deck, because these cards in general will allow you to deal with the trap before main phase, and I would not use Lightning Stormer evenly against this deck, because the second you go battle phase, they'll go end of main phase and make Avian, and then your Lightning Storm or your evenly match just never mattered, because then it just gets negated. So that's something that I think is really important to think about, whereas Cosmic and Twin are very important to use against this matchup in particular. Also Regeki, just to be able to deal with the Unpin and Barrier statue, also just fairly important here. Utilizing cards like There Can Be Only One, Anti-Spell, Zombie World. Zombie World is literally an FDK against this deck. It's just insane. Even Droll and Lockbird is just very, very strong. If you're playing the deck, though, they specifically need to be playing Cosmic and Twin in their sideboard, because they have to deal with Zombie World or else they auto-lose. So this is another thing where this matchup in particular, you have to mention Cosmic and Twin, because on both sides of the coin, you really want it against the deck, but they need it in the deck to be able to deal with cards like Zombie World. Using cards like Regeki and Dark Ruler is very common for Floowandereeze. Mystic Mine also very common, and then again, Lightning Storm evenly still very good. The next thing here is going to be against the Adventurer Synchro deck. Utilizing cards like Token Collector, Evenly Matched, Lightning Storm, Droll, all these are very strong. And then amongst other things too, like if you have your Imperm or your Veiler, making sure that you're Veiling the Hulk, and then on your turn that you're Dropletting, Chalicing, Imperming the Hulk before the main phase, just so you can't get Scythe locked. But this is exactly why I didn't add in the Scythe Lock for if you're playing the deck, because you're already playing the Scythe Lock. Utilizing cards like Mystic Mine, very strong, because again, you play 0 back row in this deck, so you want to make sure that you have a card like this that you can go into game 2 or 3 and surprise your opponent with a Mystic Mine. Still very strong. Therion P.U.N.K. If you're playing against this deck, this is something that you have to know. Siding cards like Chalice is very strong, because if your opponent in the main phase goes Hulk effect, summon Formula Synchron, draw a card, and you go chain Chalice, target Formula Synchron, and then they go chain Formula Synchron to summon Calamity, the last thing that happened in the chain was not the summon of Calamity, and Calamity's effect will not apply to the board, and you can continue activating cards for the rest of the turn. It is a when effect, and so it will miss timing. So utilizing cards like Chalice, Imperm, if you're playing Striker, Widow Anchor, all these are very important against this deck, and this is why I think that this is the weaker of like the Punk decks, is because this combo is so fragile that if it doesn't go off, or if your opponent has any kind of interruption to go ahead and activate before the formula and force it out, then your opponent's Calamity won't activate its effect to the board, which is really insane. But if you're playing the deck itself, I really do recommend playing cards like the Token Collector, Dark Ruler, even Judgment. Again, this is what I'm talking about if you're trying to protect a specific line of play. Utilizing cards like Judgment to make sure that that really does have the ability to resolve is very, very strong. Even having cards like Mystic Mine, as I was talking about, like against the deck, is very strong too, because this card alone, if they have Regulus on the board and you activate Mystic Mine, the Regulus can't negate Mystic Mine. So if you just activate Mine immediately, it doesn't matter what they chain, because if they don't have any kind of back row out, then they just lose to Mine automatically, which is pretty crazy, because their one Omni negate just doesn't do it. And that's why, again, I just don't really prefer the Therion deck. But this is something that I'm sure will end up getting tested and more solved. But as of right now, I still prefer the Adventurer Synchro deck. If you're playing against the ABC deck, really using cards like Zombie World is very strong. I like this card a lot. They can't target their own monster with Hanger because it is now a zombie. Utilizing cards like Anti-Spell, having the different dimension grounds so they can't just put their pieces in graveyard. It's really just a skip turn. There can be only one very strong as well. If you're playing the deck, though, it's not too much different. It's pretty much the same cards here. It's going to be like Token Collector, Dark Ruler, Anti-Spell. All these are very suitable options for the deck. But moving into Salamangreat, you already know. If you're playing against the deck, it's just rock. That's all you need. That's all you need. No. If you're playing against the deck, you can go ahead and utilize cards like Scythe, the Rock, your general blowout cards like Lightning Storm, Evenly, Different Dimension Ground, and There Can Be Only One. If you're playing the deck, though, you can use quite a bit. Salad doesn't really get hurt by a lot of the overlaps from different side cards. So you get to use even like Rivalry, which is really cool. You can use the Rock yourself. Droll, you already play a lot of hand traps, especially drawing into them with like Heat Soul, Dark Ruler, what have you. The amount of cards that Salad can side is just endless, and that's why it's another really cool deck. I just wish that the Rock situation wasn't so real with this deck. But maybe one day they'll get an Omni Negate. Maybe one day. Against Sunavalon, Zombie World's insane. That card's actually so good against this deck. Unless they have some kind of out for that, they just don't play the game at all. Using cards like Different Dimension Ground, they need their graveyard. There Can Be Only One, Anti-Spell, Dark Ruler. Again, their end board ends with like Regulus. So it's really a weak end board, and the only thing they'll have to interact with you is going to be the trap after you Dark Ruler them. So as long as you can play through the trap, usually you're fine. If you're playing the deck, though, once you set up your board, Anti-Spell is wonderful. You can Rivalry after you use like a Regulus negate and they try to like play through your board, then you can flip Rivalry because all you have is plants and you just kind of auto win from there on because your board is so big after that. And then also having cards like Droll is just really nice too. Against Striker, you can use cards like Evenly, Lightning Storm, Anti-Spell, Blizzard. Blizzard also is very good. Again, it's a quick play, so if they go to like Widow Anchor, steal your monster, and negate you, then you can go ahead and chain the Blizzard and just stop that from happening. It's another thing that I really enjoy about this card, also being able to shut down cards like Engage. Definitely a bit smaller on the cards that you can really utilize against the deck. You can use cards like Crow if you really need to. I just didn't add it in here either because that's more of like a main deck thing that we're seeing a lot now. Some people are citing it, but like these are, again, just more so the blowout cards, quote unquote, that I would be using against Striker. If you're going to be playing the deck, this is another deck that can just use so many cards, right? Droll, Storm, Different Dimension Ground, Zombie World. There can be just so many different options that I'm really a fan of because of this deck. Just has so much versatility, and even the toolbox in the main deck, there's just so many things that you can really use in this meta currently. Against Dragon Link, you can use cards like Token Collector, because the only build of Dragon Link that I think is really good right now is the Brave builds. So using cards like Token Collector, Nibiru, Anti-Spell, Dark Ruler, these cards are all very good, especially Droll. Droll is just an MVP against this deck, I feel sometimes, especially since they're usually playing like the Brave build. If you're playing the deck, though, Goes and Match, Rivalry, Mystic Mine, all very good options for you as well. Going into Drytron here is our last deck. This deck loses very hard to draw. Again, very MVP of this format. I think this card should be in everyone's sideboard at the moment. But you still have the ability to be able to play things like Different Dimension Ground against this deck. Again, it's just another turn skip. If you have cards like D-Barrier, also very important. They can still Zeus, but at the same time, it doesn't really matter too much if they can't Ritual Summon. Then like There Can Be Only One. And then if you're playing the deck, Token Collector, again, you can use it on your opponent's turn, just don't use it on your own, so you can't use your Drytron items, but at the same time, it's still a really good card to have. D-Barrier, Dark Ruler, what have you. And Mystic Mine, of course, because they have no back row either, so utilizing Mystic Mine is really free for this deck. But I hope that you enjoyed this video today, because again, it's just a run through of what cards you can really be siding for and against certain decks. especially just talking about a lot of our blowouts this meta. A lot of people are confused as to like really know what cards need to be in their sideboard. So I hope that today alone, again, just gave you a snapshot at what cards are really important to be running nowadays, just because those are going to be the most impactful cards we have in our arsenal. If you're not already part of my Discord, Twitch, Twitter communities, definitely go ahead and find the link in the description below. And if you have not already checked out my Metafy page, definitely go over there and see if you'd like a session. If you would and you have any questions about it, definitely go ahead and PM me on Discord. I can answer any of those questions for you, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you all.